I took the job because I needed to disappear. After everything that happened back in Boston, I just wanted a place where no one knew my name and no one asked questions. The ad was simple. Remote lighthouse keeper wanted. Must be comfortable with isolation. Room and board provided. It felt like the sea itself had whispered it into my ear. The lighthouse was off the rocky coast of Maine, reachable only by a single boat twice a week. The hiring manager barely looked at me, just gave me a key and a folder of instructions. I remember thinking how strange it was that no one wanted to know more about me, but at the time I was grateful. The place was old, the kind of lighthouse you see on postcards, with weather-beaten stones and a spiral staircase that creaked under every step. The light itself was housed in a glass dome at the top, surrounded by rusted rails and fog that never fully lifted. The first few nights were uneventful. I cleaned the equipment, logged the times I turned the beacon on and off, and watched the waves crash endlessly into the rocks. I even started sleeping well, which surprised me after everything I had been through. But then the sound started. It happened the fifth night. I was halfway through a cup of coffee when I heard it for the first time. A high-pitched scream, like metal scraping against metal, but with something human buried beneath it. I dropped the mug, and it shattered on the floor. I ran up to the lantern room, thinking maybe a bird had flown into the glass or something had broken, but there was nothing, just the beam of the light sweeping across the water and the hum of the generator. I stood there for almost an hour, staring into the darkness, waiting to hear it again. Nothing came. I went back downstairs, trying to convince myself it was just the wind or my imagination. But it came again the next night, and the night after that, always when the light was on, always in the lantern room. I stopped sleeping. My hands shook. I barely ate. I started leaving the light off just to avoid the sound, but the log said it had to stay on during foggy nights, and the fog never really left. I finally mentioned it to the supply boat guy, Charlie. He looked at me for a long moment, then said he had never heard anything like that in his 10 years of bringing food to the place. He said maybe I was just hearing the ocean or the machinery. I could tell he did not believe me, but I let it go. After he left, I climbed to the top again and stood there, watching the sun sink behind the sea, dreading the night. When the darkness came and I turned on the light, the scream came almost immediately. Louder now, more insistent. It did not echo like a normal sound. It filled the air, pressing against my skin, burrowing into my skull. I covered my ears and screamed back, but the sound stayed exactly the same, constant, relentless. That was the first night I thought I might be going mad. I even packed a bag the next morning and waited on the dock for hours, hoping maybe Charlie would come early. But no boat came. I had 5 more days to go. That was when I found the logbook. It was tucked behind an old drawer in the keeper's quarters, wrapped in plastic. The pages were yellowed and curled, filled with neat handwriting. The dates went back decades. I flipped through entries about weather patterns and fog levels. Then I saw it, the 3rd of April. Heard a strange sound in the lantern room, high-pitched. Cannot locate the source. The 4th of April. Sound came again, like a scream. No one else hears it. The 7th of April. Tried sleeping in the light room. Woke up with bleeding ears. Then the 10th of April. It is in the light. That was the last entry. I read that line over and over again, until the words blurred. It is in the light. The light had always felt cold to me. Too white. Too clean. I thought of it as a guide, but now it felt more like a lure. I decided to test it. I turned on the light at sunset and sat at the top with a recorder. The scream came right on time, louder than ever, and I watched as the light passed through the fog and over the waves. That was when I saw something in the beam, a shape, flickering, just at the edge of visibility. Every time the beam passed, it looked a little closer, not walking, not swimming, just there. I turned the light off. The scream stopped. Everything went silent. That was the worst silence I have ever heard. Heavy, final. I turned the recorder back and heard nothing but static. I stayed in the bottom room that night, lights off, curled up on the floor like a child. I thought about the last keeper and what must have driven him to write those final words. It is in the light. The next night, I turned the light on again. I do not know why. Maybe I needed to see it one more time. Maybe I needed to know I was not crazy. The scream came again, now layered with whispers. I climbed slowly to the top, heart pounding. The air in the lantern room felt thick, like walking into a boiling fog. I stood in the middle, facing the light. The beam swung past once, twice. On the third pass, it stopped, dead center on me. The light did not move, and inside it, I saw a face, pale, stretched, with hollow eyes and a mouth wide open in that eternal scream. It was not behind the glass. It was in the light itself, staring at me with a hunger I could feel in my bones. I tried to run, but the door slammed shut. The light grew brighter, swallowing everything. I do not know how long I screamed. When I woke up, I was on the rocks outside, the lighthouse dark behind me. I do not remember getting there. I waited for the boat. When Charlie arrived, he said I looked like I had not slept in weeks. I told him I quit. I did not explain. I just left. But sometimes, in the middle of the night, when I turn on a lamp or pass a streetlight, I swear I hear it. That scream, quiet, distant, waiting. And now I understand what the logbook meant. It was never about the building, never about the place. It is the light itself, and once you see it, it sees you too. They say the sea keeps its secrets, but some secrets come back with the tide. I was sent to the Flannan Isles as a relief keeper, a routine assignment meant to last just a few weeks. I had always heard whispers about the place, but most of it was seamen's talk, the kind meant to pass time on long nights. The journey out was rough, not because of the weather, but because the boatman who dropped me off would not even look me in the eye. He just said good luck and sped off before the rope even hit the deck. I thought it was strange, but I had no idea what was waiting for me at the top of those stone steps. The first thing I noticed was the silence. The sea was calm, but there were no birds, no wind, not even the usual groan of the metal weather vane on the roof. When I pushed open the main door, it was unlocked. That was odd enough. Lighthouse protocol demanded that doors stay bolted at all times. Inside, the kitchen table was set for 3. Plates of food sat untouched, covered in mold and crusted over as if they had been left out for weeks. The kettle on the stove had long gone cold. Coats were missing from the wall, but boots were still at the door. I shouted for the keepers, Thomas, Donald, and James, but the only answer was my own voice bouncing down the stone halls. No sign of a struggle, no blood, nothing broken, nothing stolen, just gone, like they had been swallowed by the sea or something far worse. I began my duties, trying to push the unease out of my mind. I told myself they had left in a rush, maybe an emergency, but every time I tried to come up with a reason, it felt like I was lying to myself. I found the logbook on the desk in the main room, open to the last page. The last entries made my skin crawl. They were dated 3 days before I arrived. The first was simple: storm approaching from the west, barometer falling fast. That was strange, because the weather reports had shown clear skies all week. The next entry chilled me to the bone. He is outside, knocking again. No one answers. There was a shaky line beneath the sentence, like the pen had dropped suddenly. The following entries were scattered and messy, as if written in fear. He does not speak, just stands there, knocking, every night, louder now. And finally, the last words written in the book: "We are not alone." I should have left right then, should have sent for help and waited on the rocks until someone came, but I told myself it was a prank, maybe a cruel joke the others had written before abandoning their post. That night, I locked every door and window, bolted the hatch, and tried to sleep. I do not know what time it was when I heard the knocking. It was slow, deliberate. Not on the door, but on the glass of the lighthouse tower above me. 3 knocks, then silence. I crept up the stairs with a lantern, heart thudding in my ears. When I reached the top, nothing. The glass was fogged from the inside, but outside the night was perfectly clear. No sign of a bird or debris. I convinced myself it was the wind, though there was none. The next day I checked the generator, the oil stores, the journal again. I tried to bury myself in routine, but something was wrong. Every time I turned a corner, I thought I saw someone just slipping out of view, a shadow ducking down the hallway. The mirrors fogged up even when it was cold. I heard whispering through the pipes at night, low and humming, like someone speaking underwater. On the third night, the knocking came again. This time it was at the main door. 4 knocks, then 5, like someone trying to count. I stared at the door for what felt like hours. When I finally opened it, there was no one there, just the ocean wind and the empty stone path. But the knocking never stopped. It just moved. To the walls, the windows, the ceiling, everywhere at once. I tried to leave a message with the wireless, but it would not transmit. Every time I tried, I heard a faint voice behind the static. My name, repeated again and again. I stopped sleeping. I stopped eating. The knocking became part of the walls. I started writing in the logbook, not because I wanted to, but because I felt like I had to, like it needed me to write. It made me write. I wrote things I could not remember thinking. He watches through the mist. We are all part of the light now. The storm never ends. On the 7th day, I woke up to find the door open, not unlocked wide open. The wind howled through the halls, but the sea was calm, dead calm. That is when I saw the footprints, wet, barefoot, leading from the door to the staircase, up to the tower. I followed them. I do not know why. I think I needed to see it for myself, needed to understand. I climbed the stairs, my hands trembling so hard I could barely hold the lantern. The footprints stopped at the top. The glass had been smashed from the outside. Shards lay in a perfect circle around the lantern room, and standing in the corner, where the light should have been, was something that should not have existed. It was shaped like a man, but its skin shimmered like water, and its eyes were deep and endless like the sea. It opened its mouth, and I heard the sound of the storm, a real storm, crashing waves, screaming wind, and voices, all 3 of them, Thomas, Donald, James, begging for help from deep beneath the waves. I ran. I do not remember how I got out, how I reached the boat, or how I convinced the Coast Guard to take me back. But they did. I never went back. I never will. The Flannan Isles Lighthouse was shut down for good the next year. They said it was outdated, too costly to maintain. But I know the truth. There was never a storm, just the thing that walks with it. The thing that knocks, and once it finds a keeper, it never leaves. It just waits for the next one. I always believed that lighthouses were places of safety, symbols of guidance in the dark, but I learned too late that some lights are meant to stay off. I got the job as the new keeper of the South Bay Lighthouse last autumn. It was supposed to be simple. Check the equipment, keep the light on, record the weather conditions. The lighthouse was old and stood on a lonely stretch of rocky coastline, surrounded by nothing but sharp cliffs and roaring waves. The town nearby had stopped caring about the lighthouse years ago, but the Coast Guard insisted it still had to be manned. I was just a temp, a fill-in until they found someone full-time. I told myself it would be a peaceful few weeks. Just me, the ocean, and a bit of quiet. I did not realize what kind of quiet waited for me out there. The first few nights were normal. The waves crashed against the rocks below, and the fog rolled in like a living thing, thick and heavy, the kind that makes the world feel smaller. I got used to the patterns, the silence, the echo of my own footsteps on the spiral staircase. On the 4th night, I noticed something strange. Out past the edge of the rocks, just where the ocean disappears into the fog, I saw a ship. It looked broken. The mast tilted sideways, parts of it splintered and hanging low. I squinted at it, wondering how it got there without anyone hearing a crash. But when I looked again the next morning, it was gone. I told myself it was the fog playing tricks on my eyes. The next night, it was back. Same spot, same broken ship. This time, I used the binoculars. At first, I thought I saw movement, people on the deck, a few waving their arms. I felt the chill you get when your brain cannot quite process what your eyes are seeing. Their faces were smooth, no eyes, no mouth, just blank, skin-colored ovals. They waved in silence, staring without seeing. My heart beat like a drum in my ears. I backed away from the window, locked the door, told myself I was just tired, that sleep would fix it. But I did not sleep. Not really. I reported the ship the next morning to the Coast Guard. They sent a patrol, but there was nothing there. No sign of wreckage, no bodies, no distress signals. They told me it was probably a ghost ship rumor or maybe some driftwood I mistook for a wreck. I wanted to believe that. I really did. But the ship came back every night. And every night, there were more of them. Faceless people, standing shoulder to shoulder. Some of them started pointing at the lighthouse. I stopped using the binoculars. I did not want to see their hands anymore. The air inside the lighthouse started to feel different. Thicker, heavy with something I could not name. The walls creaked, even when there was no wind. Sometimes I heard footsteps behind me, only to turn around and find nothing. The worst part was the feeling that I was being watched, not from inside the lighthouse, but from out there, from the fog. Like they were waiting, watching me the way a predator watches something it has already claimed. One night, I woke up to the sound of the foghorn going off, even though it was not supposed to. I ran to the control room and found the controls untouched, but the horn kept sounding, long, low groans that made my skin crawl. I stared out at the water. The ship was closer now, close enough that I could see the splinters in its wood, the faces of the people, still blank, still waving, but some of them were not standing anymore. Some were crawling toward the rocks, toward the lighthouse. That night I heard a knock at the door, not the kind of knock a person makes. This was soft, repeated, almost like tapping. I held my breath and did not move. It went on for what felt like hours, just a quiet tap, tap, tap. The next morning, I found wet footprints on the stone steps, human-shaped but all wrong. Too wide, toes too long, no shoes. They trailed all the way to the bottom of the stairs before stopping. I told myself to leave, to walk away, but something held me there. Something deeper than fear. Like the lighthouse itself would not let me go. On the 9th night, everything changed. The light stopped turning. I had just checked it 2 hours before. All systems were working. But when I climbed up, the bulb was cold, dead. I tried restarting it. Nothing. The controls froze. The generator stopped. I went outside, and the fog swallowed the world. The ship was so close, I could hear the wood groaning. The faceless people were all standing at the edge of the rocks, dozens of them, silent, staring. I could not move, could not breathe. Then I saw one of them climb the rocks, then another, then a third, slowly, like they had all the time in the world. I ran inside and locked every door, but I knew it would not matter. They did not break in. They just appeared. One moment I was alone. The next, I turned around, and they were inside, standing behind me. No eyes, no mouths, just blank faces. One of them raised its hand and touched the control panel. The light flickered on. Then it turned to me and tilted its head. I felt something cold inside me shift, like a string had snapped. The others began walking toward me, slow and quiet. I passed out before they reached me. When I woke up, it was morning. Clear skies. The fog was gone. The ship was gone. Everything looked normal. I checked the logs. The light had come on sometime during the night, but I never restarted it. The Coast Guard said they saw it from miles out, that it had helped guide a small fishing boat back after they lost their radio. They called me a hero. I tried to quit, tried to leave, but every time I get close to leaving this place, I hear the knock again. Sometimes I see one of them standing in the fog, waiting. I think the lighthouse chose me, or maybe they did. Now every night, the fog rolls in, the ship returns, and the faceless figures watch. I do not look at them anymore. I just keep the light on. I think that is all they want, for the light to stay on, for me to stay here. Because if the light ever goes out again, I know they will come back, and this time they will not stop at the door. They say lighthouses were meant to guide lost ships, but what if they also call something in? I never believed in ghosts or anything like that. I still do not, really. But what I saw at Split Rock Lighthouse changed the way I sleep, the way I walk near windows, and most of all, the way I feel about places that should be empty but are not. It started as a short solo trip, just a little break from everything. I was working too much, not talking to people, barely sleeping. I thought some cold air and silence near Lake Superior might help clear my mind. A friend had mentioned the lighthouse had been turned into a historical site, but no one was around this time of year. Off-season, I booked a nearby cabin and figured I would spend the weekend reading and walking along the cliffs. When I arrived, the place looked peaceful. Frozen waves lapped against dark rocks. The air smelled clean, sharp. The lighthouse tower stood proud and still, abandoned but solid. I walked closer and stared up at the glass top. It looked dead. The metal was rusting. The path leading to the lighthouse was cracked and covered in patches of snow. I took a few pictures and walked back to my cabin, feeling good for the first time in weeks. That night, I could not sleep. Around 3 in the morning, I was still staring at the ceiling, listening to the wind hum through the cracks in the wood walls. Then I saw something strange. Through the curtain, a flash of light came in, slow and steady, like someone swinging a spotlight. I got up and looked outside. There it was, the lighthouse light, turning, slowly, casting a long white beam across the sea. I froze. I knew there was no power running to it. I had read that in an article before visiting. No electricity, no staff, nothing but a preserved shell of the old tower. Yet the light turned. I watched it rotate for maybe 10 minutes. Then it stopped as suddenly as it began. I told myself it was a delayed sensor or maybe some automatic backup system still connected to solar power. I even Googled it the next morning. Nothing explained it, but I still brushed it off. The second night was worse. I stayed up on purpose, set an alarm for 3:20 a.m. and made some coffee. I stood by the window and waited. At exactly 3:33, the light flicked on again. It swept the sea like the night before, smooth and quiet. My chest tightened. I felt sick in my stomach, but could not look away. As the beam passed over the rocks below, I saw something, a figure, standing still near the edge. At first I thought it was a shadow or a trick of the light, but as the beam passed again, the figure was still there, pale and unmoving. I could not make out the face or any details, but the shape was human. My skin crawled. I watched for 15 minutes, heart pounding. Then the light stopped, and the figure was gone. I did not sleep after that. I just sat there, waiting for the sunrise, checking the window every few minutes. By the third night, I was shaking with dread. I considered leaving early, but something in me needed to see it again. Like if I left now, the not knowing would haunt me more than the truth. I waited again, exactly 3:33. The beam returned, cold and silent. My breath caught in my throat. This time, there were 2 figures, one standing where the first had been and another closer, halfway up the path leading to the tower. I backed away from the window. I did not want them to see me, though I had no proof they could. Every sweep of the light brought them clearer, sharper. I saw that they were not just standing, they were staring, directly at the tower, and each time the light passed, they were closer than before, not moving, just appearing slightly nearer every time, like a stuttering nightmare that advanced only when you blinked. The 4th night I did not look. I stayed under the covers with headphones on, playing soft music, but it did not help. At 3:33, the light came anyway, shining through the curtains like a knife. I felt its pulse in my bones. I swear I heard something outside, a crunch of snow, a soft dragging noise. I closed my eyes tighter and stayed perfectly still until the sun rose. That morning, I packed my bags. I was done. I could not handle another night. I wanted answers, but not at the cost of my sanity. Before I left, I walked to the lighthouse one last time. I needed to see it in daylight, to remind myself it was just a building, just stone and glass. When I reached the base of the tower, I noticed the door was slightly open. That door had been chained the first day I came. My breath fogged in the air as I stepped closer. I do not know what made me go inside. Maybe I thought I would find some logical cause. Maybe I was just too far in to turn back. The inside smelled like rust and dust. Everything was untouched. Empty shelves, broken tools, spider webs. I climbed the spiral staircase to the top. My footsteps echoed in the silence. When I reached the lamp room, the lens was clean. Too clean. No dust. No cobwebs. No sign that decades had passed. I touched the switch. It was cold, but something thrummed behind it, like a heartbeat. I turned around to leave. That was when I saw the logbook. A dusty leather-bound book on a small table by the window. I flipped it open. The last entry was dated nearly 50 years ago, but the ink looked fresh. It said one line: "The light must stay on, or they return to shore." My hands shook. I looked out the window and saw the rocks. Dozens of figures, all standing, all watching the tower, all waiting. I ran. I did not lock the door behind me. I could not. I drove home without stopping. Since then, I wake up every night at 3:33 a.m. Not because of the light, because of the faces I see in the corners of my room, pale and still, a little closer every night. I think the lighthouse was not warning ships. It was warning us. And now that the beam is gone, they are coming. Not fast, but always closer. People always say lighthouses are lonely places meant for quiet men, the kind who like silence and routine. I thought that sounded perfect for me. After everything I went through in the city, I just wanted a place where the only sound was the wind and the waves. When the old lighthouse keeper passed away and the job opened up, I did not hesitate. It was a 3-hour boat ride from the nearest harbor, standing tall on a rocky island, surrounded by endless gray water. I was told everything worked fine except for the basement, which had been sealed off after an accident years ago. The man before me had reportedly gone mad, vanished without a trace. They said it was better to leave that part of the lighthouse alone. I agreed. At first, the first few days were peaceful. The sea air was cold but clean, and the routine suited me. Mornings were spent checking the oil, adjusting the lamp, writing logs. Evenings were quiet with the crackling of the fireplace and the endless hum of the sea. I read a lot. Sometimes I would hear the gulls fighting outside, or a storm brewing in the distance, but nothing unusual. Nothing frightening. I would sometimes walk past the basement door without even thinking about it. It was locked with a rusted chain and a padlock, the key long gone. It looked old, forgotten, and I respected that. I really did. But something started to bother me after about a week. I began to hear sounds beneath the floor at night. Soft at first, like distant thudding or maybe footsteps. At first I told myself it was just the wood settling or the waves crashing below. But then came the whispering. It was faint, almost like wind through a crack, but it had a rhythm. It said my name. The first time I thought I was dreaming. The second time I sat up in bed, heart pounding. The third time I stood outside the basement door with a flashlight, shaking. I called out, asking if someone was there. Nothing. I should have left it alone. I really should have. Curiosity is a terrible thing when you are alone. I could not stop thinking about that sealed door. What if someone had been hiding down there all this time? What if there were records or something that explained what happened to the last keeper? On the 10th day, I snapped. I went to the shed outside and found a crowbar. It took me an hour to break the lock, my hands blistered and bleeding. When the chain finally fell to the floor, the silence that followed was deafening. I remember hesitating, flashlight shaking in my grip, before I opened the door and stepped down into the darkness. The air hit me first. It was damp and foul, like rotting seaweed mixed with rust and something else I could not place. The staircase creaked as I descended, and every step felt heavier. The flashlight flickered even though the batteries were new. I found myself standing in a narrow stone hallway. The walls were covered in deep scratches, like something had clawed at the rock for years. I tried to convince myself it was just erosion or animals, but deep down I knew it was not. At the end of the hallway was a small room, barely wide enough for a man to stand. That is where I found the journal. It was lying in a puddle of dark water, pages soaked and stuck together, but some parts were still readable. The handwriting was frantic, lines repeating the same phrases over and over again. It calls from below, and the walls move when I sleep, and I am not alone. Then I saw the last entry. He wants another. That was when I heard the voice again, not whispering this time, but clear and sharp, right beside my ear. It said my name, slowly, and it was not my voice. I turned around, swinging the flashlight, but there was no one there, just the scratched walls and the heavy darkness pressing in. I tried to leave, but the stairs were gone. I swear they were gone. The hallway had changed, twisted somehow. I ran, my breath echoing off the wet stone, but every corner led me back to the same room. My flashlight flickered and died, leaving me in blackness so thick it felt like a weight. Then the whispers started again, louder now, voices from all around me, speaking in tones that did not sound human. I screamed. I do not even remember what I said. Maybe I begged. Maybe I cursed. I remember falling to the floor, covering my ears, but the voices pushed through like needles. At some point, I must have blacked out. When I woke up, I was lying at the top of the basement stairs, the door wide open. Morning light spilled in, and the crowbar was gone. I ran outside, gasping for fresh air, and threw up in the grass. I wanted to leave that same day, but the boat did not come for another week. I tried to act normal, but every night, the whispers returned. Sometimes I see the walls breathing. Sometimes I wake up with deep red scratches across my arms and legs. I have not gone back down there. I never will. The journal is gone. I searched for it the morning after, but there is no sign of it. I even tried sealing the door again, but nothing holds. It swings open sometimes on its own. The last night before I left, I heard someone walking upstairs even though I was alone. I locked my door and stayed awake till morning. When the relief boat arrived, I almost cried. I told them nothing. Who would believe me? Now I sit here, far from that lighthouse, and I still hear the voice. It follows me. Sometimes I wake up with seawater on my pillow. Sometimes I hear someone scratching at the walls. I think it is trying to come through. And sometimes, when I look in the mirror, I do not see my own reflection. I see him, the man who vanished. He smiles, and I know he wants another.